The howling wind carried more than snow that February night in 1878. It carried the ghost of a woman who had given up on living. Nathan Holloway stood in the doorway of his small ranch house just outside Salida, Colorado, staring into the white fury of the blizzard that had blown in from the mountains. His horses were secured in the barn, his cattle huddled in the lower pastures where the canyon walls offered some protection, but something had drawn him outside. Perhaps it was instinct honed by years of reading the land, or perhaps it was something else entirely. Either way, he pulled his heavy coat tighter and stepped into the storm. The snow stung his weathered face as he trudged toward the eastern fence line, following nothing but a feeling that crawled up his spine like a warning. Nathan was 32 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. The war had done that, the one that ended 13 years ago but still haunted his dreams. He had come west to escape those memories, to find peace in the wide open spaces where a man could breathe without choking on the smoke of burning cities and dying boys. That was when he saw her. A dark shape collapsed against his fence post, nearly buried in the drifting snow. For a moment his heart stopped, thinking she was already dead, but then he saw the faint rise and fall of her shoulders. Without hesitation, Nathan scooped her into his arms. She was light, too light, and her skin was like ice beneath his gloved hands. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her dark hair was crusted with frost. He carried her back to the house, kicking the door open and bringing her directly to the fireplace. The flames were already burning strong, and he laid her on the thick bearskin rug in front of it. Her clothes were soaked through, a black dress that marked her as a widow, and Nathan knew he had to get her warm quickly or she would die. Working with practiced efficiency born of necessity rather than impropriety, he removed her wet outer garments, leaving her in her cotton undergarments, and wrapped her in every blanket and quilt he owned. He heated water on the stove and filled several bottles, tucking them around her body. Then he sat beside her and waited, watching the shallow rise and fall of her breath, willing her to live. It was nearly an hour before her eyelids began to flutter. Nathan leaned forward, relief flooding through him. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing green irises that seemed to hold an ocean of pain. She looked at him without fear, which surprised him. Most women would have been terrified to wake in a strange man's home. "You are safe," Nathan said quietly. "I found you by my fence. You were freezing." She stared at him for a long moment, then her eyes filled with tears that spilled down her pale cheeks. "I was hoping I would not wake up," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He had heard that kind of despair before, had felt it himself in the dark days after the war. "What is your name?" he asked gently. Sarah Reynolds." Her voice cracked on the surname. "I am a widow. My husband died 3 months ago and I have nothing left. No money, no home, no reason to keep going." Nathan reached for a cup of water he had prepared and helped her sit up enough to drink. She trembled in his arms, but she managed a few sips. "I am Nathan Holloway. This is my ranch. You have a reason to keep going now. You are alive, and that is enough." Sarah shook her head weakly. "You do not understand. I am broken. Everything inside me is shattered. I cannot feel anything but pain and emptiness." Nathan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then he looked back at her, and his blue eyes held a depth of understanding that made her breath catch. "So am I," he said simply. "I have been broken for 13 years, but broken things can still have purpose. Broken things can still stand." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them and the wind howling outside. Sarah did not know why, but something in his words, in the quiet certainty of his voice, made her believe that perhaps she could survive another day. Just one more day. Over the next few days, the blizzard raged on, trapping them both inside the small ranch house. Nathan gave Sarah his bed and slept on the floor near the fireplace, insisting that she needed the warmth and comfort more than he did. She was too weak to argue, her body still recovering from her near death in the snow. Nathan cooked simple meals of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, and slowly Sarah regained some strength. She learned that he lived alone on this ranch, that he had 100 head of cattle and a half-dozen horses, and that he rarely went into town except for supplies. He was a man who valued solitude, she realized, not because he was unfriendly, but because he carried wounds that had never properly healed. "Were you in the war?" she asked him one evening as they sat by the fire. She had moved to a chair now, wrapped in one of his quilts, her hair finally dry and falling in dark waves around her shoulders. Nathan nodded slowly, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. Fought for the Union. I was 18 when I enlisted, full of ideas about honor and duty. By the time I was 20, I had seen things no man should see." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I watched my best friend die in my arms at Gettysburg, watched a lot of boys die. When the war ended, I could not go back home. Everything felt different, wrong, so I came west." Sarah listened quietly, seeing the pain that flickered across his weathered face. "My husband was not in the war," she said softly. "He was too young, but he died anyway. A fever took him last November. We had only been married 2 years, and suddenly I was alone." She looked down at her hands. "His family blamed me, said I had brought bad luck. They took everything, the house, the small savings we had. I had nowhere to go, no one who wanted me." "That is not right," Nathan said, anger threading through his voice. "A woman should not be cast out like that." "Right or wrong, it is the way of things," Sarah replied with a bitter smile. "I am just another widow in a world full of them. I wandered for weeks, taking whatever work I could find, but the winter was hard. I ran out of money, out of hope. When the blizzard came, I thought it was God finally showing me mercy." Nathan leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Listen to me, Sarah. I do not claim to know God's plans, but I do not think He brought you to my doorstep just to die. You are here for a reason, and until you figure out what that reason is, you stay here. I have plenty of room, and I can use help around the ranch come spring." Sarah stared at him, surprise and something else, something warm and fragile, stirring in her chest. "You would let me stay?" "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Nathan said firmly. "I know you have been dealt a cruel hand, and I know you deserve better. Besides," he added, a slight smile touching his lips, "it would be nice to have someone to talk to besides my horses." For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah felt the faintest glimmer of hope. It was small and uncertain, but it was there. "I do not know how to repay you," she whispered. "You do not need to repay me. Just get well. That is enough." The blizzard finally broke after 5 days, leaving the world outside transformed into a pristine white landscape. Nathan spent the next few days digging out paths to the barn and checking on his livestock. Sarah insisted on helping despite her still recovering strength, and together they worked in a companionable silence that felt natural and unforced. Sarah discovered that she liked the rhythm of ranch life. There was something healing about the simple, honest work of caring for animals and maintaining the property. Nathan was a patient teacher, showing her how to feed the horses, how to check the cattle for signs of illness or injury, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the wildlife. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to notice things about Nathan that made her heart beat a little faster. The way he was unfailingly gentle with the animals, the quiet strength in his hands, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. He never pressed her for more information about her past, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He simply accepted her presence as naturally as he accepted the sunrise. For his part, Nathan found himself looking forward to each day in a way he had not experienced in years. Sarah's presence brought life to the lonely ranch house. She had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable. She sang softly while she worked, old hymns and folk songs that filled the air with beauty. And when she looked at him with those green eyes, he felt something long dormant stirring in his chest. But both of them were cautious, carrying the weight of their respective pasts like chains. Nathan had convinced himself years ago that he was not meant for love or family, that his brokenness made him unsuitable for such things. And Sarah was terrified of opening her heart again, only to have it shattered once more. One evening in early March, as they sat by the fire after supper, Sarah finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Nathan, why do you live out here alone? A man like you could have a wife, children. Why choose solitude?" Nathan was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "After the war, I tried to court a woman back home. Her name was Elizabeth. She was kind and beautiful, and I thought maybe I could build a normal life with her, but the nightmares came every night. I would wake up screaming, thinking I was back on the battlefield. One night I nearly hurt her in my sleep, thought she was an enemy soldier. After that, she would not see me anymore, and I did not blame her." He looked at Sarah, his eyes dark with old pain. "I realized then that I was too damaged for a normal life, so I came out here where I could not hurt anyone." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She understood that kind of self-imposed exile, that belief that you were somehow tainted beyond redemption. "Do you still have the nightmares?" she asked softly. "Sometimes. Not as often as before, but they still come." He paused, then added quietly, "I have not had one since you arrived." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I have not felt this peaceful since before my husband died," she admitted. "Being here, working beside you, it makes me feel like maybe I can be whole again someday." Nathan looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment something shifted between them. It was subtle, like the first crack in a frozen river, but it was undeniable. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "I need you to know that you do not owe me anything. You can stay here as long as you need, and I will never ask anything of you that you are not willing to give. But I also need you to know that having you here, it has changed things for me. You have changed things for me." Sarah's heart was pounding now, hope and fear warring within her. "How?" she whispered. "You make me think that maybe I am not as broken as I believed. That maybe there is still a chance for me to have something good in my life." He stood abruptly, running a hand through his dark hair. "But I do not want to burden you with that. You have your own healing to do." Sarah stood as well, crossing the small distance between them. She was close enough now to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What if I want to be burdened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if I think that maybe we could help each other heal?" Nathan's hand came up to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "Are you sure? I am not an easy man, Sarah. I have demons that I wrestle with, and I cannot promise you an easy life." "I do not want easy," Sarah said, leaning into his touch. "I want real. I want honest. I want someone who understands what it is like to be broken and is still willing to try." Then she did something that surprised both of them. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a soft, tentative kiss that held all the hope and fear and longing she had been carrying. For a moment Nathan froze, and Sarah thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Nathan rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face. "I have not felt this way since before the war," he admitted. "I did not think I was capable of it anymore." "Neither did I," Sarah whispered. "But here we are." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in front of the fire. Two broken people finding unexpected solace in each other's arms. It was not a grand romantic gesture or a passionate declaration. It was something quieter and deeper, the recognition of two kindred souls who had found each other in the wilderness. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They worked together during the day, tending the ranch with a shared sense of purpose. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Nathan told Sarah about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his parents who had died of illness before the war, about the dreams he had once harbored of becoming a teacher. Sarah told him about growing up in Missouri, about her love of reading and writing, about the small joys she found in gardening and cooking. They also shared their pain more openly now. Nathan told her about the worst days of the war, the friends he had lost, the things he had done that still haunted him. Sarah told him about the loneliness of her widowhood, the cruelty of her husband's family, the desperation that had driven her into the snow. And in the sharing, they found that their burdens became a little lighter, but they were also cautious with each other, taking things slowly. Nathan continued to sleep by the fireplace, though there were many nights when they sat together until the early hours of the morning, talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. There were kisses, sweet and tender, but nothing more. Both of them knew they were building something important, and they did not want to rush it. In early April, Nathan needed to go into Salida for supplies, and Sarah insisted on coming with him. It would be her first trip to town since arriving at the ranch, and she was nervous about how people would react. A widow living alone with an unmarried man would certainly cause talk. The ride into town took about 2 hours, and Sarah found herself relaxing as they traveled. The mountain scenery was breathtaking, with snow-capped peaks rising against a brilliant blue sky. The Arkansas River ran alongside the road, swollen with snowmelt and roaring with life. Salida was a growing town, having been founded just a few years earlier when the railroad came through. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and various other businesses. As Nathan guided their wagon down the street, Sarah was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. "Ignore them," Nathan said quietly, his hand finding hers and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Their opinions do not matter." But as they were loading supplies into the wagon, a woman approached them. She was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Nathan Holloway," she said in a voice that carried down the street. "I heard you had a woman living with you. Is this true?" Nathan straightened, his jaw tight. "This is Sarah Reynolds. She is a widow who nearly died in the February blizzard. I gave her shelter, and she has stayed to help with the ranch." The woman looked Sarah up and down with obvious disapproval. "It is not proper for an unmarried woman to live alone with a man. People will talk." Before Nathan could respond, Sarah stepped forward. She had spent too many months being pushed around and judged to tolerate it anymore. "With respect, madam, I nearly froze to death. Mr. Holloway saved my life." If people choose to think poorly of that kindness, then that speaks to their character, not ours. The woman's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could respond, another voice cut in. "Mrs. Patterson, perhaps you should mind your own business." They all turned to see a tall man in a sheriff's badge approaching. He was older than Nathan, probably in his early 40s, with brown hair graying at the temples and kind eyes. "I am Sheriff Tom Mitchell," he said, tipping his hat to Sarah. "Welcome to Salida, Mrs. Reynolds." I think what Nathan did was admirable, and anyone who says otherwise can answer to me. Mrs. Patterson huffed but retreated, muttering under her breath. Sheriff Mitchell smiled at them. "Do not let the gossips get to you. Most folks around here are good people who mind their own business. Unfortunately, every town has a few who need to stick their noses where they do not belong." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nathan said, shaking his hand. "I appreciate the support." "No thanks needed. Now, if you have time, why do not you both join me for a cup of coffee at the hotel restaurant? I would like to hear how you are doing out at your place. Heard the blizzard hit pretty hard." They agreed, and soon the three of them were sitting in the small restaurant attached to the Salida Hotel. Over coffee and apple pie, Sheriff Mitchell told them about the town's growth and the challenges of maintaining law and order as more people moved into the area. He was easy to talk to, and Sarah found herself relaxing in his presence. "If you do not mind me saying," the sheriff said, looking between them, "you two seem well suited. It is good to see Nathan with some happiness in his eyes. He has been alone out there too long." Nathan shifted uncomfortably, but Sarah smiled. "He has been very kind to me. I do not know what would have happened if he had not found me that night." "Well, I am glad he did," Sheriff Mitchell said warmly. "Now, Nathan, I heard you might be looking to expand your herd this spring. I know a rancher up near Buena Vista who is selling some good breeding stock. Might be worth your time to check it out." The conversation shifted to ranching matters, and Sarah listened as Nathan and the sheriff discussed cattle breeds and market prices. She was struck by how much Nathan knew, how respected he seemed to be despite his tendency toward solitude. It made her proud in a way that surprised her. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, the wagon loaded with supplies, Sarah leaned against Nathan's shoulder. "I like Sheriff Mitchell," she said. "He seems like a good man." "He is. One of the few I consider a friend." Nathan glanced down at her. "You handled Mrs. Patterson well. I was ready to give her a piece of my mind, but you beat me to it." Sarah laughed softly. "I have dealt with worse than her. My husband's family said things that would make her blush." She sobered then. "Nathan, do you care what people think about us living together?" "No," he said firmly. "But I care if it hurts you or damages your reputation. Sarah, I have been thinking about something." He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I know we have only known each other for a few months, but I also feel like I have known you my whole life. You make me want things I thought I could never have. You make me believe I could be a good husband, maybe even a father someday." Sarah's heart was racing now. "What are you saying?" Nathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "I bought this while you were looking at fabric in the general store. I know it is fast, and I know we are both still healing from our pasts. But Sarah Reynolds, I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you collapsed in the snow. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. I love you too. I did not think I could ever feel this way again, but you have shown me that it is possible to heal, to hope, to love." Nathan opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was not elaborate or expensive, but to Sarah, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He slipped it onto her finger, and then he kissed her with a passion and tenderness that made her dizzy. "We can have a long engagement if you want," Nathan said when they finally pulled apart. "I do not want to rush you." But Sarah shook her head. "I have waited long enough for happiness. Let us marry soon. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Salida. Sheriff Mitchell stood as Nathan's witness, and the preacher's wife stood for Sarah. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with love and genuine joy. Sarah wore a new dress of pale blue that Nathan had insisted on buying for her, and she carried wildflowers that were just beginning to bloom in the high country. When Nathan said his vows, his voice was steady and strong. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. You have given me back my life, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift." Sarah's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you. You saved me when I had given up, and I will never forget that. Together, we will heal and grow and find joy again." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed his bride with such tenderness that several of the townspeople who had gathered to witness the ceremony wiped tears from their eyes. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had come primarily to judge, found herself moved by the obvious love between the couple. After the ceremony, Sheriff Mitchell hosted a small reception at the hotel restaurant, inviting anyone who wanted to come and celebrate. To Sarah's surprise, quite a few people showed up, bringing food and well wishes. She realized that most of the town was happy for them, that Nathan was more well-liked than he probably realized. As evening fell, Nathan and Sarah rode back to the ranch, now their ranch as husband and wife. The spring air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and new grass. The mountains stood sentinel around them, their peaks glowing pink and gold in the setting sun. When they arrived home, Nathan scooped Sarah up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made her laugh with delight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," he said, his eyes shining with love. "It feels like home," Sarah said softly. "For the first time since I lost my first husband, I feel like I belong somewhere." That night, they came together as husband and wife, and it was beautiful and healing for both of them. Nathan was gentle and patient, mindful of Sarah's past and her needs. And Sarah gave herself fully, trusting him completely. In each other's arms, they found comfort and passion and a deep, abiding love that transcended their individual brokenness. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Sarah threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, planting a garden, sewing curtains, adding small touches of beauty and comfort. Nathan expanded his herd with the cattle from Buena Vista, and Sarah proved to be a capable partner in managing the ranch. They had their challenges, of course. Nathan still occasionally woke from nightmares, thrashing and crying out in his sleep. But now Sarah was there to hold him, to remind him that he was safe, that the war was long over. Her presence seemed to push back the darkness, and the nightmares became less and less frequent. Sarah had her own difficult days, times when grief for her first husband would wash over her unexpectedly, or when memories of the cruel words from his family would resurface. But Nathan never judged her for these moments. He simply held her and let her feel what she needed to feel, offering quiet support and understanding. As spring turned to summer, their love deepened and matured. They developed their own rhythms and routines, learning each other's moods and needs. They laughed together over shared jokes, worked side by side in comfortable silence, and talked long into the night about their dreams for the future. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Sarah turned to Nathan with news she had been holding close for a few days. "I am with child," she said softly, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Nathan's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then a smile spread across his face, so full of joy and wonder that it took Sarah's breath away. "Truly," he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Truly. I think I am about 2 months along. We will have a baby sometime in February. Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I never thought I would have this, he said, his voice breaking. A wife, a child, a family. Sarah, you have given me everything I thought was lost to me forever. We have given it to each other, Sarah corrected gently. We saved each other, Nathan. We both had to be broken before we could find each other and become whole again. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Sarah bloomed with health, her face glowing and her body growing round with their child. Nathan was attentive and protective, sometimes overly so, but Sarah found his concern endearing rather than smothering. They prepared a small nursery in the corner of their bedroom, building a cradle from pine wood that Nathan sanded until it was smooth as silk. Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of hope and anticipation. This child would be loved, cherished, raised by two parents who understood the preciousness of life and the importance of love. As winter approached, Nathan became increasingly anxious about the upcoming birth. The memory of finding Sarah nearly frozen in the snow was still vivid in his mind, and he worried about her and the baby constantly. Sarah tried to reassure him, but she understood his fear. After all they had been through, the thought of losing each other was unbearable. In early December, Sheriff Mitchell rode out to the ranch with news. There is a doctor who just moved to Salida, he told them. Young fellow fresh from medical school back east, seems competent. I thought you might want to know given Sarah's condition. Nathan immediately rode into town to meet with Dr. James Carter, a man in his late 20s with serious brown eyes and a professional manner. After talking with him, Nathan felt some of his anxiety ease. The doctor seemed knowledgeable and caring, and he agreed to come out to the ranch when Sarah's time came. Christmas that year was the happiest either of them had experienced in years. They decorated the house with pine boughs and holly, and Nathan surprised Sarah with gifts he had secretly ordered from a catalog. Books she had mentioned wanting and a beautiful shawl to keep her warm. Sarah gave Nathan a pocket watch she had bought with money she earned from selling eggs in town, engraved with the words, "To my love, my strength, my heart." As they sat by the fire on Christmas night, Sarah resting against Nathan's chest with his hands cradling her swollen belly, they talked about their hopes for their child. I want our son or daughter to know love, Sarah said softly. I want them to grow up feeling safe and valued. They will, Nathan promised. We will make sure of it, and we will teach them that broken things can be mended, that people can heal, that love is always worth fighting for. In early February, just as the world was bracing for another round of winter storms, Sarah went into labor. Nathan rode hard to town to fetch Dr. Carter, and the young doctor arrived at the ranch within 2 hours, his medical bag in hand and a calm confidence in his demeanor. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nathan stayed by Sarah's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement and love. There were moments when he was terrified, when Sarah's pain seemed unbearable and he felt helpless to ease her suffering. But Dr. Carter remained calm and reassuring, guiding them through each stage. Finally, on February 10th, exactly 1 year after Nathan had found Sarah in the snow, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry that filled the small house with life and joy. Dr. Carter cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms. He is perfect, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face as she looked at their son. He had a head of dark hair and blue eyes that would probably change color, but in that moment, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Nathan knelt beside the bed, one arm around Sarah and one finger gently touching his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his father's finger, and Nathan felt something crack open in his chest, a final wall crumbling away. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah, his own eyes wet with tears. "Thank you for giving me this gift." They named their son James after Dr. Carter, who had delivered him safely, and Henry for Nathan's father. Little James Henry Holloway became the center of their world, a perfect symbol of hope and new beginnings. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Nathan proved to be a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes without complaint. He would walk the floor with James when the baby was fussy, singing old songs in his deep voice until the child settled. Sarah would watch them together, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. As James grew, so did their family's bonds. Sheriff Mitchell became a regular visitor and a doting honorary uncle. The people of Salida, who had initially gossiped about Nathan and Sarah, now smiled when they saw the little family in town. Even Mrs. Patterson had softened, once bringing over a hand-knitted blanket for the baby. By the time James was 6 months old, the ranch was thriving. Nathan had expanded his herd further and hired a young hand named Peter to help with the heavier work, giving him more time to spend with his family. Sarah's garden was producing abundantly, and she had started selling preserves and baked goods in town, contributing to their growing prosperity. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching James play with wooden blocks Nathan had carved, Sarah leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. "Do you remember when you found me in the snow?" she asked quietly. "Every day," Nathan replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I thank God for that storm, for whatever made me walk out into it that night. I was so broken then," Sarah said, "so convinced that my life was over, that I had nothing left to live for." "So was I," Nathan admitted. "I did not realize it at the time, but I was just as broken in my own way. I had given up on ever having a real life, on ever being happy." Sarah lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes shining with love. "And now," Nathan smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. He looked at his wife, at his son playing contentedly nearby, at the home they had built together. "Now I know that being broken was not the end. It was just the beginning. We had to break before we could rebuild ourselves into something stronger." "Together," Sarah added. "Together," Nathan agreed, kissing her softly. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the Holloway family sat together in peaceful contentment. They had traveled through darkness and despair, through loss and pain, to find each other. And in finding each other, they had discovered that love truly did have the power to heal, to restore, to make broken things whole again. The years that followed were good ones. James grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's steady nature. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose, who had her father's dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. 2 years after that came another son, Michael, who was adventurous and fearless from the moment he could walk. Nathan's ranch became one of the most successful in the region, not because he was driven by greed, but because he worked with integrity and treated both his animals and his employees with respect. Sarah became known throughout Salida for her kindness and her sharp mind, and she was often sought out for advice by other women in the community. The nightmares that had once plagued Nathan became rare, and then stopped altogether. The ghosts of the war, while never completely forgotten, no longer had power over him. He had found peace in the love of his family and the honest work of building something good. Sarah, too, found complete healing from the trauma of her first husband's death and the cruelty that had followed. She had learned that she was stronger than she knew, that she could survive anything life threw at her. But more importantly, she had learned that she did not have to survive alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Sarah stood on their porch watching their 3 children play in the yard. The ranch house had been expanded over the years, now boasting several additional rooms and a wide wraparound porch. The barn had been rebuilt and enlarged, the cattle herd had grown substantially, and they had added chickens, pigs, and even a small orchard. "You ever think about that night?" Nathan asked, slipping his arm around Sarah's waist. "The night I found you." "All the time," Sarah replied, leaning into him. "It was the worst night of my life and the best night of my life all at once. I was ready to die, Nathan. I had given up completely." "I know," he said quietly. "I am so grateful you survived. I cannot imagine my life without you, without this family we have built." Sarah turned in his arms to face him fully. At 34, she was even more beautiful than she had been at 24, her face showing the character and strength she had gained through the years. "We saved each other," she said, echoing words she had spoken years before. "You saved my body that night, but I like to think I saved your soul." Nathan cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "You did. You absolutely did. I was lost before you came, Sarah. I was surviving but not living. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope again." They kissed then, a kiss full of a decade's worth of love and devotion, of shared struggles and triumphs, of 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. When they pulled apart, their children came running up to the porch, laughing and calling for their parents' attention. James, now a tall and serious 10-year-old, wanted to show his father something he had found by the creek. Emma, 7 and full of energy, was dancing around demanding that her mother watch her new ballet steps. And Michael, just 5 and completely fearless, was climbing on everything he could reach, giving his parents regular heart attacks. As Nathan went with James to examine his discovery, and Sarah watched Emma's impromptu performance while keeping an eye on Michael's climbing, they shared a look over their children's heads. It was a look of complete understanding, of shared joy, of gratitude for the unlikely path that had brought them together. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Nathan and Sarah sat by the fireplace as they had done countless times over the years. The same fireplace where Sarah had first woken after nearly freezing to death, where they had shared their first real conversation, where they had admitted their brokenness to each other. "I have been thinking," Sarah said, her head resting on Nathan's shoulder, "about writing down our story. Not for publication or anything like that, just for our children and grandchildren, so they know where they came from, what we survived to build this life." "I think that is a good idea," Nathan agreed. "It is a story worth telling. A story about how the worst moments of our lives led us to the best. A story about broken things being mended," Sarah added. "About winter leading to spring," Nathan continued. "About death leading to life. About despair leading to hope. About loneliness leading to love." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly, the night peaceful around them. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think we would have found each other if we had not been broken first? If you had not been haunted by the war, if I had not lost my first husband and been cast out, would we have been ready for this kind of love?" Nathan considered the question seriously. "I do not know," he admitted. "Maybe not. Maybe we needed to be broken down to our very foundations before we could build something truly strong. Maybe that is how life works sometimes. It has to tear us apart before it can put us back together the way we were meant to be. Like a bone that heals stronger at the break," Sarah mused. "Exactly like that. As winter settled over the Colorado mountains once more, the Holloway family thrived. Nathan taught James about ranching and responsibility, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over the years. Sarah taught Emma to read and write, and together they explored literature and poetry. Michael, too young for formal lessons, learned simply by being loved and guided by his parents and older siblings. The ranch continued to prosper, but Nathan and Sarah never lost sight of what truly mattered. They had learned through hard experience that money and property meant nothing without love and family. They were generous with their wealth, helping neighbors in need and supporting the growing community of Salida. Sheriff Mitchell, now graying and preparing to retire, often told people that Nathan and Sarah Holloway were proof that good things could come from tragedy. He had watched their love story unfold from the beginning, had witnessed their struggles and their triumphs, and he never tired of seeing them together. Dr. Carter, who had delivered all 3 Holloway children, marveled at how Sarah had survived that night in the snow. He told Nathan once that, in his medical opinion, she should have died from exposure. It was a miracle, he said. Or perhaps it was fate. She was meant to live, meant to find you, meant to build this family. Nathan did not argue with either interpretation. Whether it was miracle or fate or simply incredible luck, he was grateful every single day for the storm that had brought Sarah into his life. As the years continued to pass, the Holloway children grew into fine young adults. James inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's intelligence, eventually taking over much of the ranch's daily operations. Emma became a teacher in Salida, beloved by her students for her kindness and creativity. Michael, true to his adventurous nature, became a horse trader, traveling throughout Colorado and bringing exciting stories home to his family. Nathan and Sarah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges, as all couples do, weathering economic downturns and personal losses. But they faced them together, their bond unshakable because it had been forged in the fires of shared trauma and healing. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and now numerous grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of laughter and love, multiple generations coming together to honor the 2 people who had started it all. That evening, as the celebration wound down and the younger grandchildren were put to bed, Nathan and Sarah slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. At 62 and 54, respectively, they moved a bit slower than they once had, but their hands still fit perfectly together and their eyes still held the same love. 30 years, Sarah said softly, looking out at the ranch that had been their home for so long. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me in the snow, and sometimes it feels like I have known you my entire life. Both are true, Nathan said, his voice still strong despite his age. We have packed multiple lifetimes' worth of love into these 30 years. You have any regrets? Sarah asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Nathan shook his head firmly. Not a single one. Every choice I made, every hardship I endured led me to that night when I walked out into the storm and found you. How could I regret anything that brought me to you, even the war? Sarah asked gently. Even all those years of pain and nightmares. Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering. The war was hell and I would not wish it on anyone, but it shaped me into the man I became, the man you fell in love with. And without that experience, I might not have understood your pain, might not have known how to help you heal. So even that terrible thing had a purpose in the end. Sarah squeezed his hand. I feel the same way about losing my first husband and everything that came after. It was awful, and I thought I would die from the grief and despair. But it brought me to you, to this life, to our family, and that makes it worth it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the mountains. These same mountains had witnessed their entire journey, from Sarah's near death in the snow to this moment of peaceful reflection. They had been the backdrop for every important moment of their lives together. "I love you, Sarah Holloway," Nathan said, turning to look at his wife. Her hair was gray now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to him she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her truly smile. "I love you, Nathan Holloway," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze with green eyes that still sparkled with life and joy. "Thank you for walking out into that storm. Thank you for not giving up on me when I had given up on myself. Thank you for teaching me that broken does not mean useless," Nathan responded. "That scars can be signs of strength rather than weakness. That love can heal wounds that seemed too deep to ever mend." As they kissed under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of the beautiful life they had built together, they both reflected on the truth that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. Broken things could be mended. Broken people could heal. And sometimes, 2 broken people could come together and create something whole and beautiful and lasting. Their story had started in darkness and despair, in a blizzard that should have claimed Sarah's life. But it had transformed into something luminous and hopeful, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love. They had been broken, both of them, shattered by life's cruelties and tragedies. But in finding each other, in choosing to be vulnerable and to trust again, they had discovered that being broken was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something far better than they could have ever imagined. The ranch would continue to thrive for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the Holloway legacy. But it all started with one desperate widow in the snow and one lonely cowboy who refused to let her die. It started with 2 broken people who had the courage to say, "I am broken," and the wisdom to respond, "So am I." And from that honest admission of mutual brokenness, from that shared vulnerability and understanding, grew a love that would endure through all the seasons of life, stronger than any storm, deeper than any pain, more enduring than the mountains themselves. They had saved each other, healed each other, and built a life together that was rich with meaning and full of joy. As Nathan and Sarah Holloway grew into their final years, still hand in hand, still deeply in love, they knew without question that every moment of suffering they had endured had been worth it to bring them to this place. They had transformed their individual tragedies into a shared triumph, their separate brokenness into a unified wholeness. And when their great-grandchildren asked them years later about the secret to their long and happy marriage, they would look at each other with knowing smiles and answer together, "We were both broken, but we healed together. We never pretended to be perfect, never expected the other to fix us. We just loved each other through the pain until we came out the other side. That is all. That is everything. The end."